All right, we're starting our last module before our first break. And this is going to start with Introduction to the Electromagnetic Spectrum, which is your 2.3a notes. So sometimes you'll see it abbreviated as EMS. It's just an abbreviation for electromagnetic spectrum. So the top of your notes say Introduction to EMS. That's just electromagnetic spectrum. All right, make sure you have your notes. So what is the EMS? It is the complete range of frequencies of electromagnetic waves from lowest to highest. So frequency from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency. It can be used to gather information about distant objects, for example, stars and galaxies. All right, so you're writing what's in red. Sorry, I forgot to say that earlier. You're writing what's in the red box. So the different types of the EMS waves are radio waves, microwaves, visible light, which is shown here. So the colors we see all the way from red to violet, infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma ray. Make sure you've written down what's in red. So the entire electromagnetic spectrum is more than just visible light. Again, we just listed all the different things that are on the spectrum. We've got radio waves, microwaves, all the way to gamma rays. It can be described in many ways, including the type, so the type of waves here, or the scale, so how the size of the wavelength, to the temperature, to the frequency, and some other ways. So we're going to be using this chart to help us organize the electromagnetic spectrum, and you also have a part of this, you have like this top section here in your notes. All right, so some of this stuff is going to be reviewed because you've already learned about transverse waves, but so remember that waves are a disturbance that travels through space and matter. They transfer energy, they do not transfer matter. They can travel through electrical and magnetic fields, and some examples are light, microwaves, radio waves, and X-rays. Electromagnetic waves are transverse waves. They do not need a medium in order to transfer energy. Electromagnetic waves can travel through a vacuum, so they can travel through space. That's how we can see the light from the sun. That's how we can feel the heat from the sun. This is because those electromagnetic waves can travel from the sun through space, which does not have any matter in it, and we can have this light and this warmth on Earth from the sun. So, just going to review some parts of the transverse wave. You should know this, but I'm going to review it just in case. So the crest, remember, is your highest point on a transverse wave. So this is a crest, this is a crest. All these spots up here are crests. And then your trough is the opposite. It's the lowest point. This is a trough, this is a trough, this is a trough. And then the wavelength, right? That's the distance between a crest or a trough. So this is a wavelength from crest to crest, or this is an example of a wavelength from a trough to a trough. It measures one complete wave. And then amplitude, this is the maximum extent of a wave. So what y'all know it as is the height. It's the height of the wave. It's from this rest position to either the crest, or it could be rest position down to the trough. And just again to review frequency, because we're going to be talking about this, the frequency depends on what type of wave it is on the electromagnetic spectrum. So high frequency, the word frequency, frequent means how often something's happening. This has a high frequency because it's moving faster, so it's more frequent, high frequency. This has a low frequency, it's moving slower, so there's not as many here. It's not as frequent. High frequency, low frequency. And it's measured in hertz, which can be abbreviated to Hz. All right, that was all the review. Now we're going to be writing something down on each slide. So starting with the longest wavelength is radio waves. So it's the longest wavelength, so it has the lowest frequency, and it actually has the coolest temperature. So the approximate scale of this wavelength is as tall as a building. So remember, wavelength, right? Has a long wavelength. So the distance between one crest and one crest on a radio wave is as tall as a tall building. So make sure you write down what's in red. Oh yeah, the examples. We've got FM, AM radio stations and stars. Those are examples of radio waves. And then next is microwaves. So as we're going down, we are reducing the wavelength. The wavelength is getting shorter as we move from left to right. So microwaves need close proximity to the transmitter in order to transmit the wave. So it needs to be close to it in order to transmit the wave. Some examples are microwaves, like microwaves in your house to heat up food. Routers, so internet routers, cell phones, stars, those are all examples of microwaves. And then continuing on the right, so the wavelengths are getting shorter. We have infrared waves. Infra means below. So these waves are just below visible light. You'll see that in a second. And then some examples are remote controls. So your remote control uses infrared waves in order to transmit that signal from your remote to the television. Flames, lamps, and stars. And then visible light. So this is what we can see as humans. Humans can see visible light. And then it has Roy G. Biv here, which is the colors red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And some examples are light bulbs, fire, and stars. Next up is ultraviolet light, which is often called black light. So some examples or some uses is sterilization, stars, and sunburn. This is why we get sunburn is from UV light. X-ray. So this has a pretty high frequency waves, but it's not the highest. You can see in comparison to radio waves, it has a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. Some examples are how we see inside organisms. It's the same thing like X-rays. If you break your wrist or your leg, they use those waves, those X-ray waves, in order to take a picture of your insides. Airport security, dentist office, stars. So those are all examples. And then lastly, we have gamma rays, which have the highest frequency, and they have the highest temperature. And some example is radiation therapy. So this is what they use for people that have cancer. They get radiation. This can also be used for sterilizing things, and this is also in stars. All right, last slide is how we use it. So how do we use our knowledge about the electromagnetic spectrum to study the universe? So astronomers use all kinds of electromagnetic waves to study the characteristics, meaning the temperature, energy, and color of stars. They can also use the electromagnetic spectrum to determine the chemical composition of stars. So they can use the electromagnetic spectrum to figure out what stars are made of, what elements. Is it made of carbon? Is it made of hydrogen? What is it made of? They can use the electromagnetic spectrum to figure that out.